It's time, folks. We've all been waiting for this day, this week even, because brace yourself, it's finally race week again. I'm trying to predict where all the teams are right now. It's hard, but say it with me now. We've got to give it a go. And one team that is advised to give it a go is a certain American team that finally has been confirmed for the grid, much to my embarrassment. If you know, you know. Cadillac will be the 11th team after all, after months of backroom wrangling, but the biggest news is kind of a twofer here. First off, that after many months and hints and articles of speculation, there is not a guarantee that one of the drivers for the Cadillac team will be an American after all. The team principal, Graham Loudon, famed for being one of the team principal and figures of the Manor team before they folded, says that if an American driver were to get in on their books for 2026, it would have to be on merit, not just because of the fact that they came from, well, America. Which is a good thing. That it will mean that if Colton Herta does get the seat, that it would be because Mario Andretti, Graham Loudon and everyone at that team will think that he has earned it on merit. He would have had a good year in IndyCar. Colton Herta's getting sick and tired of the rumours suggesting him. It's been going on for many years. If it was going to be now, it has to be now. But what I really like at the moment is that we're not hearing news about the Cadillac lineup right now. That Mario Andretti's instructions of waiting until the summer break to confirm their lineup for next year is a sound and measured approach. That they are taking everything into consideration. And one driver that people are really thinking that the team should consider is the out of work for next year, George Russell, because I've heard many rumours about Russell to Cadillac and that they really should throw everything that they have into securing the services. And as we found out in Drive to Survive, there was some kind of pact between Toto and Lewis that Max would not join Mercedes while Lewis was at that team. Kind of like a Senna-Prost vibe at Williams back in the day. Wait until the weekend. I will have my scoop and my thoughts of Drive to Survive, so do subscribe to the channel for when that drops. I've got a lot of stuff to say about that series. But pundits around the paddock are really ruminating the subject, that they should really acquire the Mercedes driver for the fact that he might be a really notable candidate, akin to Carlos Sainz going to Williams. And in my honest opinion, I doubt George would do it, and I doubt Toto would abandon Russell in the end after just 1 year as the undisputed team leader. Even if Johnny Herbert is now jumping up and down at news outlets to remain relevant, stating that there was favouritism going on last year, where Lewis was the lesser favoured. Because ever since Johnny Herbert relinquished the duty of being an FIA steward, he's now been doing everything he can to go, "Oh, listen to me! Listen to me! George is favourited! I don't like Fernando! Oh!" Yeah, okay, Johnny, calm down. We get it. You were a steward. Just calm down, okay? Not even Jacques Villeneuve is this outspoken. You're making Ralf Schumacher blush! Besides, Toto has his own Italian version of Verstappen at home, who is loyal to him to a fault, and will be around for a good long while, whereas Max's future in F1 altogether has a really big question mark looming over it. And not to mention, I doubt George Russell would relinquish a front-running team position to go back to a potential backmarker team again after 3 years at Williams. There's no way. He will do everything he can in his team to make sure he stays at Mercedes for a couple of more years. And I think Toto will stick by the Russell-Antonelli-Rossinelli partnership for a good few years, because as I mentioned about Max, there is no telling what he will be doing in the next couple of years, whether or not he'll remain at Red Bull, or some kind of rule change will happen, or some kind of incident with the FIA which will make Max Verstappen just go, you know what, I'm done with this. He'll bounce just at a moment's notice, like Nigel Mansell did at McLaren because it wasn't working out for him in 1995. He'll just bail. He'll just bail because he's not enjoying it anymore. And that sort of unpredictability and uncertainty is not something Toto Wolff wants to have, because who's to say that if he does sign for Mercedes, that there comes a time where Max doesn't get on with the car or he gets on with the sport, he'll just bail on Mercedes, and then just Toto's like, I don't know what to do, I don't know what to have, I had the Valkyrie, I had a Nick, and then I gave it all away for Max. Oh no, Kimi, I've already put you in the car, I can't put you in the car again. Or can I? Hey, at least the idea of George going to Cadillac is somewhat intriguing and curious, albeit I don't really see it happening. It's certainly a lot better than what ESPN is paddling with bringing back Daniel Ricciardo again. No! Stop it, ESPN!
Naughty.
And same goes to you, Planet F1, for this headline stating that Franco will be in Australia amidst rumours of Jack Doohan being dropped. Of course Colapinto would be there, since, well, that's his job as a reserve driver, in case either Jack or Pierre can't race. Much like how I reckon Paul Aaron will be there in Australia too, since he is also a reserve driver for Alpine. And as we saw during the pre-season testing coverage, Paul does have his uses at the Team Enston operation. Obviously, because he's the boy who makes the tea and gets all the cookies and the biscuits. But seriously, my goodness, folks, cool it with the Jack stuff. At least let him enjoy his home race in solitude. And speaking of such, let's actually get into the race itself. A great place for a race, as some might say. Ah yes, Albert Park at the start of the season. It just feels right, doesn't it? And I know a lot of people are going, oh, I don't want to get up at 4 a.m. Come on, this is part and parcel of being a Formula One fan. You get up early for some of the flyaway races, it's an experience. But also just take into consideration all the people that live in the Eastern Hemisphere and have to get up early or stay up late for these races. So we're just sampling a soupçon of what they have to deal with on the daily. And also, it's part of the magic of the season opener, in my mind. And more magic could unfold since there is rain potentially forecast for Sunday, with a steadily increasing chance of it pouring down on the track. And that's a pretty big deal, since as far as I can recall, it's never rained meaningfully at Albert Park before. As far as I can tell, the last time it rained in Australia was in Adelaide in 1991, and it got so bad I think the race was stopped after 14 laps or something. It's a long time ago. 35 years since the last time it properly rained down under? That would be a huge headline, and that would make the first race of this season all the more spectacular, wouldn't it? That would be absolutely crazy. There'd be no data to go off of. None of the teams would have predicted this, or anticipated it, or prepared for it. Some people say it's going to be heavy rain, some say it's going to be light rain, maybe it might not rain at all, but that level of jeopardy is something that's making things really spicy. And I'm loving this! Especially considering that the basic form book is suggesting that perhaps we could be in for a McLaren domination arc at the start of the season. Well, if preseason testing is anything to go by, so if we do get some rain, it could make things very interesting. Now, you might be completely shocked as to me wanting some sense of jeopardy, considering that McLaren are the favourites right now and we could get a 1-2. I do want a good show. Even if it's my favourite team getting a 1-2, I want them to be at least a little bit challenged, so that means it makes it all the more satisfying, right? And yes, I know we shouldn't be taking pre-season testing data and times into account here, but I have been looking around online at international outlets and even they say that McLaren are looking like the fastest team at the moment going into this season, and that is a huge deal for the likes of McLaren because for the last few years they've started with a really mediocre car or sometimes a really bad car, and it takes them a few races to get up to speed. No, they're right up to speed from the get-go. That's different. We've not seen this throughout the entire regulation cycle. And even though it's a little bit squirrely at the rear, it might still mean a 1-2 in Melbourne is doable, especially considering that Max Verstappen has conceded that despite progress being made with the Red Bull car at preseason testing, the team has not done enough to catch up to their rivals as of now. He has conceded the Australian Grand Prix, and only time will tell whether or not they can actually catch up in a meaningful manner, with the team's technical director Pierre Wache admitting that not everything went smoothly in the pre-season testing session, but it really does go to show that Red Bull is trying to discover what is up with their car, trying to increase the operational window, and we did also see Max Verstappen when he was doing some test runs, especially going through a really awkward Sector 2, where he was just shaking his head, he looked quite morose, a bit down, that they hadn't really discovered the full flow where he could go into the first race as a potential favourite. I do trust Max's opinion in this regard. He is not a sandbagger or somebody who's going to hype himself up. He's a realist in that regard. If he's saying that he doesn't really have much of a chance, then he doesn't really have much of a chance. Unless we get a Brazil 2024 all over again, and then he just is a class act of the field, or if we get that rain. It might actually transform that car and him. Then I might sense that some of you will be going, wait a minute, Law, surely Red Bull are sandbagging here, right? Well, I would hesitate with that thought for the moment. We get to see times, we get coverage for hours and hours and hours because F1's realised that they can profit from pre-season testing. Maybe there's little reason to do all this sandbagging as it takes away time from getting meaningful data, and there's more chance that people could call them out for doing that kind of stuff. What might be better is just to switch up your program to focus on less glamorous work and just get the fundamentals right that don't attract faster times. So in that regard, you could easily point to what Haas and McLaren have been doing, not really shouting from the rooftops or going for glory runs. They were just doing their own thing, very much against what everyone was expecting. Everyone was expecting McLaren to do the same as everyone else, and then suddenly, oh, well, they're not doing that. And just as I was saying that, talking about the Alpine reserve drivers, Kushmaini has been announced as yet another reserve driver, as if they needed any more. Is he going to be there as well? But yeah, okay. My point is that McLaren look likely to be the favourites for this race and maybe the next couple of races. What's going to happen with team orders? Can Oscar Piastri get an Australian home win for the first time in Formula One history. Alan Jones won in 1980, but it was a non-championship event. A podium is certainly likely for Oscar though, given the pace of the MCL 39 in testing, but then this brings to light the idea of intra-team competition right from the start, and whether or not Lando Norris will be more feisty than ever this year. And may I remind you, as has been made evident, papaya rules are back with a vengeance, and they will definitely need to be strictly enforced here, because I've predicted that we might get at least 2 instances where Oscar and Lando make some sort of contact, even if it's just banging of wheels, because that's exactly what we saw happen in 2014 when Mercedes were just fighting with each other. We saw the banging of wings, the banging of wheels. That's how it started. And I do sense that Lando is motivated, fired up, knowing that Max Verstappen is compromised with his car, and he knows that his car is with him from round 1 instead of just having to plod along with a compromised machine for a while. Oscar is also fired up, knowing that he has the potential of the car down, and now he has the home advantage with a car that can easily go for a podium. And may I remind you what happened last year? Oscar was on for a podium at Albert Park in 2024, and he had to then succumb to team orders to let Lando through to take 3rd place, and then Oscar finished 4th. Now that is something that will be fresh in his mind. Will he yield in the same manner if he's leading the race and then Lando's right behind him? And then if he doesn't, yeah, the Australians will love it, but then the entire internet will explode and actually care about McLaren for once, because drama. And then there could be a flashpoint at turn 1 if it's an all-McLaren front row. Who's going to yield? Who's going to have that situation if it's papaya rules where they are allowed to race? You might be thinking, Lord, what are you doing? Surely you don't want them to make contact. You don't want them to be causing drama and anger and tension. Yeah, I don't want that to happen, but I know it could happen. Adrenaline is going to be maxed out. Either driver will want to make a statement at the opening round. And speaking of statements, there are other statements that could be made here further down the grid, and people will be looking to Williams to see what they can make in terms of a statement. Hopefully a better one than they made last year with having to give up Logan's chassis for Alex and then he didn't score anything. Will Carlos score anything with his debut for the team? It's entirely possible, but not a top 5 finish, I imagine. I imagine that what Carlos and Williams have been saying about top 5 finishes not being likely remains somewhat valid for now. I think that he might get somewhere like 8th place or something like that, since he does have an affinity with Albert Park, since, well, he won it last year in triumphant effect after having his appendix removed, but maybe finishing still behind the likes of Pierre Gasly, because, as I've been saying, Alpine are going for glory this year, and they'll be giving Pierre everything to make sure that he can score some points and get some headline results. And I'm not saying anything higher than 8th because there are questions as to the efficacy of the FW47 over longer fuel runs, since the times at testing did raise eyebrows and they were the fastest overall. And not to mention, I feel like Ocon could maybe get a cheeky point because no one's quite sure what Haas are doing right now, so I think it would be remiss of me to say that they will be completely nowhere. Who knows? I think Ocon might get a cheeky 10th, just a singular point. That would be certainly a decent start for them. But I bet you're wondering what the situation at Ferrari will be. Will Lewis Hamilton pip Charles Leclerc at the opening race? Well, no, I don't think so. But I don't think Ferrari will be all that bothered for the time being. The main mission here is to get Lewis settled in as quickly as possible and then go from there. But this is a very small time frame here. We're talking like maybe 2-3 races. In time, priorities will change. Results will need to come thick and fast to justify getting Hamilton in the first place. And some experts are suggesting the initial SF25 specification isn't there yet for Hamilton, with some noting that testing hinted at a car which wasn't that giving in terms of handling and ride, as well as the dreaded porpoising returning for Ferrari, which they hoped to have fended off last year. Supposedly it caught Lewis out a couple of times during those 3 days, and it might be something that rears its ugly head again in Melbourne. Lewis did have his struggles, albeit they were relatively small. They were there though. And considering that Charles Leclerc has a lot more experience with the Ferrari model in terms of workflow, style, and overall driving experience, he might have the advantage initially. It really depends how quickly Lewis can adapt, and that's okay. Lewis doesn't have to be absolutely all guns blazing right from the get-go. He just needs to make sure that he has a team that can work with him in the long term. I do think the situation for Ferrari will improve, but right now, because you're asking me to predict, I don't think it's quite there yet. And I'm pretty sure something that you want right now from me are my predictions for the top 5. So, for the first time this year, Here we go. Now, I know trying to predict for the first round of the season only off the back of testing is a tricky subject, but we gotta give it a try anyway. And I'm predicting that the top 2 positions, because we may as well, because I think everyone's predicting this, 1, 2, it's going to be McLaren, but it's going to be Norris first, Piastri second. I'll touch upon Oscar in a moment, but first off with Lando. Because put simply, McLaren look incredibly comfortable, and I kind of suspected this at the end of 2024, that even though they're going for an extreme model of car, the processes have not really changed all that much. It seems like they've just plowed more resources into the path that they were already taking, and this is going to be the first car that has been solely developed in their brand new wind tunnel of theirs. That this is something that will be really putting in all of the progress that McLaren have been making in the last couple of years into great effect. And Lando has a car finally which is fully with him, that he's not worried about. He looks calm, serene. And after he lost the 2024 championship to Max, there was some sort of zen state I saw from him, that he feels at one, at ease, assured. This might translate well at the beginning of the year, especially if he can make the most of the McLaren advantage and build up a comfortable buffer, like Max did last year. It might do him the world of good. And this track has yielded good results for him before, including the podium last year, albeit team orders helping him in some shape or form. You've got to only look to testing. He was pumping in the times thick and fast. To say that Lando doesn't have a chance of winning the Australian Grand Prix would be very remiss and just odd, given what we've seen. I know it's preseason testing, you've got to take that into consideration. You will only know for sure at the end of Q3. But right now, McLaren look good. They look stable. They only have a little bit of a squirrely, spinny rear end, but that can easily be fixed with setup. And sometimes you need that kind of rear end instability to be able to get that oversteer. Otherwise, you're just going to have some kind of boat or something like that. And I feel like Lando will get on top of it because he has a car that is with him, mostly, and he seems quite happy. This could be a domination period for this final year of these regulations, and this would be such a huge turn of form from McLaren over the course of these last 4 seasons. It'd be absolutely remarkable. But either way, Lando Norris, first place, Oscar, second. Even though he's my boy and I really want him to do well, especially at his home race, I just don't see him edging out Lando at this first Grand Prix, because testing looked so much more in Lando's favour than Oscar. Sure, Oscar put in some decent race runs of his own, but not nearly as much as Lando was able to do. I think the most that Oscar got in a difference from Mercedes 16 seconds to Lando's 31, which might mean there could be a 15-20 second gap between both McLarens. It might change. The home advantage might benefit Piastri immensely because people are paying attention to him. Because I've seen people in the comments from Australia realising that the media down under don't really care about any drivers from Formula One, that they don't pay them much recognition. Daniel Ricciardo didn't get as much coverage as you might have thought, which is crazy to me. Oscar, though, it seems like he's starting to get that momentum under him, considering that Daniel's not there anymore. But maybe if the car is with him and it placates to his smooth driving style, it might work wonders for him. And his racecraft is absolutely remarkable when he's in close quarter combat and he's feeling confident enough to be able to follow and maybe overtake. Because even though it's not Lando, him and Charles, Oscar, is absolutely magical. I hope we can get that sort of papaya racing that McLaren ideally want, where they can race each other fairly, cleanly, not make contact, and just show how dominant the team itself is and how unified they are. That's the ideal. Whether or not that might actually happen remains to be seen. But I do feel like that either Oscar will finish behind Lando just in terms of results, or if Oscar finds himself in the lead, then Lando might get that position because Lando championship and all that stuff, because yeah, it's something that he lost last year. And if that does happen, that would easily put a dampener on everything and cause controversy because Australia, obviously. This would have been their first opportunity to actually have a really good chance of winning the damn thing. Then I'm going to have a cheeky punt, and in third place, I'm going to predict that it'll be George Russell who will get that final spot on the dais. Really, Lowell? You really think George could pit the Ferraris? Well, yeah. Especially if it turns out on Sunday it does rain. George is a dab hand in the wet, and also it'll be a fair bit cooler than on Saturday. Saturday, I think, will be 37 degrees, so whether or not Mercedes have cracked that problem with temperature and hot conditions remains to be seen, but if they have, and then it gets even colder, Mercedes could excel, kind of like what we saw in Vegas with George. He was absolutely dominant there, and the Ferrari seems to be a little bit ill at ease at the moment. It'll be fixed quickly. Mercedes seemed quite confident. Antonelli was just pumping in the times quite consistently, no issues whatsoever. I don't really rate Antonelli for getting a top 5 finish, just so you know, and the points may be a little bit of a question mark, but I think he will adapt fairly quickly. But we're talking about George here. Because I will admit, day 3, George pumping in that fast time at that moment was a real big surprise for me. He was happy throughout the entire event. Like, this was the first time in this regulation cycle Mercedes have a car that is working for them. That it's not some sort of problem, that they're going to be going into the first race of the season with a headache. They certainly made a huge improvement over what they were last year, where the car just lacked overall pace, albeit it was relatively stable. And the biggest question mark is, especially if it's in the wet, is if Mercedes allow him to just do what he wants to do. Trust his bum instead of just the data blindly. Because there were quite a few times last year where George wanted to make a call, but the team prevented him from doing so, which did compromise him in the long run. Brazil, he could have had a chance of going after Max for the win there, but ultimately Mercedes overruled him, put him in, and then he ended up being compromised, not even on the podium. So therefore, I feel like if he can make the most of that team leadership role and be able to justify his case more effectively, he could be in for a top 3 finish, albeit a bit of a distance away from the McLaren, at least for now. Mercedes, not a bad shout, I think, for 3rd. And then not too far behind them will be 4th placed Charles Leclerc. Yeah, Ferrari are not looking mega right now, but that won't stop Charles Leclerc from giving it a darn good go, a good old college try. 4th place, I think, is certainly doable for the Monegasque, simply for the fact that, well, he knows what the Ferrari is like, he has the experience, he has the motivation, the determination to better Lewis, and if he can get first blood in race 1, then that'll be a huge boost for his confidence going forward into the season. It really just depends on how both the Lecfosi and Team LH handle this battle, this pressure over the course of the season, if it doesn't reach a crescendo or a power decay or something like that, which I fear it will. But right now, I feel like Charles will have the advantage, but it really depends on how quickly Lewis adapts, or if he qualifies well. If Lewis has a blinder in qualifying and he thrives and really makes the most of the conditions, it could easily change. But right now, based on what we saw in testing, and based on trends from last year, I feel like Charles does have the advantage here. Not to mention that if it does rain, all eyes will be on Ferrari's strategy team to make sure they don't have a howler like they did in Montreal and in Silverstone, where they put on the inters at the wrong time and then they had to come in again and it ruined Charles's race. Once they get their act together, if they can fix it with their really aggressive upgrade package and campaign that they've been promising, then they can easily get past Mercedes again and challenge McLaren with a really good battle toward the moment at the Spanish Grand Prix when the flexi-wing things comes into effect and there's more strict conditions. Maybe Ferrari have got a plan. And then, in 5th place, Max Verstappen. Because even though the RB21 is still not there yet, and their rivals have a little bit more understanding and serenity with their overall packages, it's not going to stop Max from giving it a go of his own and completing the top 5. It's certainly doable. And even though Max Verstappen has conceded that the Australian Grand Prix is just not his to win, I think maybe Max might take this on the chin. Because from the vibe I'm getting from Red Bull is that they think they've got something. They're close. They just need that little bit extra time. That first major upgrade package to really get it back, clicked together, and Max can have something where he can go for the title, because I do value him as a championship contender. That RB21 does have hope and potential, because on clear laps it looked fairly effective, but in that second sector of Bahrain, I saw the time just being eaten away from Max's car to the point where he does have the advantage in sector 1, but then by the time you get to the end of the lap, he's lost about nearly a second. But I do appreciate the fact that Red Bull are keeping it real somewhat, that they're admitting to their mistakes and they're not trying to just say, oh, there's nothing to worry about, what are you saying, shut up about it. No, they're being fairly pragmatic and realistic, and I think that's a tack that Max has insisted, instead of just pretending that there's no issue and everything is fine, because everything's not fine. Red Bull are having a problem at the moment. This is actually a breath of fresh air for Red Bull, that they're understanding and recognizing that there is an issue that needs to be fixed, something that Max and Checo have been talking about for the last couple of years, but are finally being addressed. Yeah, 5th place right now, certainly realistic, and I feel like Max, if it is really wet, could maybe get something more. But right now, bottoming out the top 5. But make no mistake, if the conditions are right there, he might get an on-track advantage. And speaking of advantages, there are some of those regarding Honda stepping back from managing Yuki Tsunoda's career. On paper, it looks like they're abandoning him, but in reality, it's a huge change for the better. To find out why I think this change of management might benefit Yuki and other future Japanese racers going into Formula 1 and International Series, watch this video next, straight after this one.